We're lacking a quorum, but we'll go ahead and start with the roll call. Mr. Creedle, you're on virtually. Until we have a quorum, we can't officially approve that. So if you'll just hang tight for a moment. Okay, Benny Gates. Philip Hart.
Here.
Yana James. Dave Johannes.
Yep.
Eric Mai.
Here.
Kendra Norrell. Casey Overton. Michelle Parrish. Damian Pitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Robertson. Brian White.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Roger York.
Here.
Great. So we do have a request from Dr. Creedle to participate in the meeting virtually due to a personal matter. Until we have a quorum present, we'll hold on taking that vote. As I said, and Mr. Creedle, hang tight and just you can observe. Technically, we'll motion you in as soon as we get a quorum. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the city's Planning Commission, and we're charged with advising the Planning Commission, Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the zoning ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. And we can't approve the meeting notes yet, so we'll hold that for now and then roll into public comment. So at this time, we'll take comment from the public on items that are not on today's agenda. We'll start with those folks in the room. If you would like to offer comment at this time, if you could please come forward and offer us your name. Come on up.
Thank you. I'm Will Wilson. I live here in the 2nd District. I had the opportunity last month to attend the open house session. Thank you all for the work so far to put that together. It was great to see. I live in Jackson Ward, and my block is actually the one that was chosen for the deep dive in the pattern book. And I think my parcel ranking 2 or 3 nonconformity. So that was interesting to see. It was a great block to choose. The variety of housing types here. You have urban estate residences, duplex of a variety of configurations. You have small 3-unit apartment buildings, garage units, ADUs, etc. So it just kind of shows what neighborhoods can look like. It's a great block. You have families, you have different people being able to access that. You have professionals, students, etc. A lot of that housing development was built obviously before anything resembling a special use process, incremental, right off Broad Street, so it developed kind of with that corridor. With that being said, it was brought to my attention that you're kind of balancing this idea of allowing by right duplex or 2 units per lot. I really encourage you to keep that in. I think my block, my neighborhood kind of shows what that can be. Not every property owner there is going to go through a special use process for 1 unit. I'd even consider 3. I mean, why not? I encourage you to think of this exercise not just because our zoning code is 50 years old, but actually because our zoning code, we need to zone for housing. We know it's a housing supply crisis. We know our neighborhoods can take on more density. Our household sizes are down. Demand for smaller living spaces is up. We have people moving into our neighborhoods. So yeah, by right duplex, maybe go 3. I really think that's not going to be disruptive. Also, if you look at that block too, I also would like you to look at the minimum setback. I still saw that there was minimum setbacks on a lot of those residential districts. Well, that Jackson Ward block, if you look on the side streets, doesn't have any setback on some of those side unit homes. I don't think there's necessary to keep that setback. I think you unlock a lot of more opportunities for development on side streets where you don't have that depth going back to the alley, but you can break off some of those larger parcels where you have another access point there. So just small changes. Let's get rid of minimum setback. Let's allow 2 or 3 units by right. A lot of cities across the country are doing this. Austin allowed 3 last fall. Cambridge is allowing 6 by right across the city. So let's not settle for less. We can do more. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Joseph Carlisle. I live in North Churchill. I'd like to thank you all for the time and effort you're dedicating to this important work. Richmond's zoning decisions will shape our city for decades, and I appreciate the careful consideration you're giving to these issues. I want to strongly support allowing by right duplexes in all residential zoning districts. Increasing housing options throughout the city is essential to addressing Richmond's housing crisis and ensuring that more people can afford to live here. By right duplexes are a simple, effective way to gently increase the density in our city. I also want to oppose the creation of an auto-oriented zoning district. Richmond has an opportunity to be forward-thinking and shaping the city that prioritizes walking, human scale development, and a vibrant public spaces. Large-scale rezonings like this are rare. The last one we had was in the 70s, so we should take this opportunity to create zoning that supports a more connected, livable city. If a developer wants to build something that's car-focused, they could use the special use permit process that we currently have for a lot of other things. So building within the limitations of other zoning districts, the default should be a city designed for people and not just cars. If done correctly, unwalkable places will gradually support more walkability. And again, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
How are you? My name is Lee Williams. I live in 5th District near Mainland Park. I'm also the advocacy chair of Sierra Club, Falls of the James Group. Sierra Club is a grassroots environmental organization that advocates for the protection of the planet, people, and places. Why are housing and urban land use so central to environmental policy? Follow the pollution. Pollution in the form of greenhouse gases is the driving force behind climate change-induced extreme weather, floods, and droughts. Pollution comes from sprawl. Pollution comes from having to drive 20 minutes to get to work. Pollution comes from having to drive to a grocery store because you don't have a corner store you can walk to get the milk you forgot or the butter you forgot. Pollution comes from having to drive your kids to school instead of having the ability to bike or walk there safely. There's no way for Richmond or the state of Virginia to meet its climate goals unless it reduces its vehicle miles traveled, which in plain language is how much you drive. How much gets driven, how many miles do you drive? Increasing density will allow the building of more homes and mixed-use buildings where people actually want to live, work, and play, reducing those vehicle miles traveled and reducing pollution. Thank you for your work here today. My hope is that this refresh will unlock new housing supply in Richmond for folks that have been kind of lost in the middle. Teachers, nurses like my daughter who can't afford the American dream. A refresh that will broaden access to truly livable housing with concurrent permitting reforms to speed up that process. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Casey, and I live in Swansboro, right off Hall. And I just want to draw attention to
What's your last name?
Casey Flores. Sorry,
Thank you.
I just want to draw attention to a real big opportunity that the city has the chance to do something extraordinary right on Hall, where the north-south bus pulse line is coming in the future, which I hope we can speed up. But it is there's kind of a blank canvas really between two major nodes in the Richmond 300 plan. Manchester and the Southside Plaza, and even a neighborhood node where Hall splits off with the Midlothian Turnpike. That area really is a blank canvas. There is nothing but either rundown buildings or just vast empty space. And I would like to advocate for maximal zoning usage of that. You build 3 stories up and you have beautiful skyline views, and I'd like to see a lot taller than that. It's right along a bus route. It can help create really a better Richmond for all with connectivity. And so thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to offer a comment at this time?
Just a brief one.
Sure.
My name's Andrew Leffler. I'd like to support the by right duplexes, both from a housing and environmentalist perspective. Yeah, no, that's all I had to say.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Do we have anybody online?
Oh, one hand there.
Yeah.
Ms. Marilyn, I think you can unmute yourself.
Ms. Merrill, if you can hear us, you can unmute yourself and offer comment.
We go. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
It came on. Hi, I'm Patricia Merrill. I live on at 608 Maple Avenue in the 1st District, and just wanted to express a somewhat contrary view to some of what has already been said, but I would not be in favor of duplexes by right. I think we have to, I'm appreciative of the housing challenges that Richmond has, But a one size fits all really ignores some of the neighborhoods that have a lot of character and that have grown up and that people have moved to because that's what they expected to have when they, and so, I do think while I certainly want to be forward thinking, I also think we have to recognize that we have many, many residents who have been in their places for many years and expect to live in single family detached homes and don't expect, duplexes growing up all over the place. So I'm just expressing a contrary view with respect to duplexes by right.
Thank you for taking the time to comment. Do we have anybody else online? There's no one else. We'll close the public comment period. I do want to note that we have been joined by Mr. Gates, Ms. Overton, and Councilwoman Robertson. So we do have a quorum now. If we could go back to the agenda item I need a motion and a second to allow Dr. Cradle to participate virtually.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, Mr. Cradle, you should be able to participate now. And we also need a motion and a second to approve the January meeting notes.
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Okay, so we will move over to Mary Ann Pitts, who will give a recap of the council's previous meeting and introduce the purpose of today's meeting.
Sure, I'll be quick because we have a lot to discuss at today's meeting. At our last meeting, we had an update on our engagement to date for the first phases of the engagement process. We also went through the menu of zoning districts in preparation for our public meetings at the last that we had last week. Those were the main. The council's also given an opportunity for open discussion on topics that they wanted to discuss in general about the work we're doing. We hope to have that again on future agenda items. We have a lot of questions on this meeting, so it's a little bit more programmed, but having that throughout the process to give you a time to talk more big picture about the work we are doing. Tonight, you'll see a brief presentation and then some questions and some workshopping with your groups regarding some assumptions we're looking at as we do the mapping based on the districts, and also a discussion of some of the changes that have occurred since the last time you've seen the districts at a meeting. That is, I think, a brief summary of what we're going to be doing today.
Anyone have any questions for Mary Ann? All right, it's a quiet group today. So we will move over to the next agenda item, which is the consultant presentation.
Can I do real quick before the consultant presentation, the working groups?
They were, I missed that. I apologize.
And a lot of the working group conversation, again, we're going to hope to have via email. The working groups, you all should have received an email. Working group topics, we're looking at utilizing the Richmond 300 topic areas for the different working groups, falling under those buckets. The goal is that the working groups are utilizing Richmond 300, those sections of Richmond 300 and other adopted documents. I know there were some concerns about working group members may not understand all of the documents, RVA Green 2050 or the Affordable Housing Plan or other documents we operate under. We are bringing the experts from the city technical team in the room that will have the understanding of those documents together. So these are the topics. I've reached out to all the advisory council members, and we have people willing to be leaders these conversations. So the goal that by the end of this week is to get out a working group interest form. The working groups are open to the public, so we'll be getting that out by the end of this week to let people know about these topics, since we do have leaders for all of them, that we're moving forward with this. Set up meetings with the individuals that have volunteered to be leaders so we can work to set up the first meeting. Our thought is to have this first meeting to look through module 1. Am I saying right number? Module 1.
Yeah.
Module 1 information between the April and the May meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee. The purpose of the working groups is really to review through that lens and see what's missing and what might be contradictory based on the lens that they're looking at. That having that first meeting set up between April and the May ZAC, and then reporting back to the May ZAC. Ideally, virtual meetings just for ease of scheduling and the number of meetings. But we'll be reaching out to discuss with those individuals and volunteers.
Does anyone have any questions about the working groups?
So the potential working group leaders have not yet been.
No, they have not.
All right, now we will turn it over to the consultant's presentation. Nay, is that who you today? Great.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to give you hopefully a very short presentation. We've got a couple general questions for discussion with the group, and then we're going to do a bit of a breakout afterwards. Related to your workbooks that you've been given. So we got started. So 3 things to talk about today. Just really quick overview of some of the big themes from the February open houses. And I'd sort of give you a bit of a kind of overview of how to read the draft districts, which is one of the materials that's in front of you today. We won't go through all of it, of course, because it's a big stack, but I'm going to kind of give you a bit of an intro to it and then let you take it away and review. And then introduce you to the workbook discussion questions today, including some testing of the mapping. So big takeaways from the February open houses, just in terms of what they were. I think a lot of you did attend them, which is great. But we had 3 open house sessions. You can have community center, and then sort of a pop-up one downstairs in City Hall in the morning. And then we had another one at the main library next night. Pretty good attendance, actually, about 113 attendees we counted, and a total of 292 comments received on the boards, which is pretty good. Pretty happy with that turnout and level of feedback. So we're still working through the full list of comments, and we'll be kind of tweaking things and adjusting as we go forward. Just to kind of give you a few kind of really high-level bits of feedback that we got a lot of. Most popular comment overall, lower minimum lot sizes. Historic row houses, both attached and semi-detached, are considered the most characteristic of Richmond. I think that was common in the pattern book in particular. The call for more mixed use and more transit-oriented development across the city. Obviously, that's in alignment with a lot of the vision for Richmond 300. So I think just put support for that. Concerns about the structural capacity that comes with future development, even though a lot of people supported more development, they were worried about the capacity to handle increased density in some parts of the city, and what that means. Concerns about the affordability of new housing and the perception that the city doesn't care about existing residents, they're just trying to sort of attract more people to the city. So we know we've heard that from a lot of people before. The city continues to be a good place to live for all the existing residents and affordable place to live. And then finally here, on the question of duplexes, I would say we largely heard support for the idea of continuing to allow duplexes by right in the residential detached districts. So for the moment, at least, we're continuing to show that there. Again, we can come back to it later on. It's not the final version, but for now, we're continuing to show that as allowed in the districts. And so what we're going to be showing you today, and then I guess over the next little bit, during the last stack meeting, we kind of gave you a timeline for the remainder of the project. This is just a kind of a zoomed in sort of mini timeline at the next few months, just to talk about how we're rolling out module 1, which is the districts and the mapping. So what you're seeing today in your first step 1 package, it's a zoning district line. That's the draft districts. It's still a work in progress in a number of ways. So some of those graphics are finalized. Some of them are still a little bit coarse looking. You'll see some of those just looking different than each other. So over the next little bit, we're going to be finishing up those graphics. And obviously all the content of that is up for discussion and for a while as well. As we go through the open house comments, as we hear from additional comments from you guys, etc. So that's what you've got in front of you right now. The districts, the back part of that document, which I'll speak to a little bit more in like standards. So that really the rules interpretation for the form standards. So that really explains the way that we actually calculate all those numbers that we summarize in individual districts. Coming up after this, in the next couple of months, like I said, there will be some revisions and tweaks to those districts and their graphics. There's also going to be a more of a full look at uses in April. So we have a use table that we're working on the staff that's going to go through each one of these districts and talk about specifically all the different things you're allowed to do or not do, or do with certain conditions attached to them. So that'll be kind of coming up later on. We started with the form, get to the uses in a little bit. We'll have questions and discussions about that as well. And then finally, we'll be doing a full set of mapping. So what you see today is just some kind of initial tests of the mapping. But we're going to be, by May, we're hopefully going to be coming up with a full draft set of maps for the city. Again, still to be discussed. We're not going to be finished this process until early next year. But the idea is to try and get that together as a package by May. The maps that you're seeing today are really just tests that are there to kind of support certain questions. In terms of the whole Howland districts, not substantially changed since the last time we spoke to you, and wasn't significant for open houses last month, a couple weeks ago. In terms of changes that have happened since then, one thing that's probably minor in the bigger scheme of things, but we've merged parks and conservation into one district. We tried the city park staff to make them a distinction didn't really work for them that well, so we just put those together into one for the moment, keeping cemetery separate. We've added a few more metrics. When you flip the district package, you'll see a few additional standards and metrics associated with districts that you didn't see in the summaries, the preliminary summaries that you've seen before. They're usually say sort of maybe kind of less defining of those districts than the initial metrics that you've seen. So there's a few new ones in there. And then there's, like I said, there's other changes that might get a consideration as we go through the full set of feedback from the open houses. Continue to hear feedback from you guys as well. So a couple of general questions before I introduce you to the package that's in front of you. And these are just things that came up both the open houses and just the discussions afterwards with staff. So I'll just put these few guys in there as a group first. Based on the open house feedback, the RD, the detached districts are still being shown as allowing 2 units plus an ADU. One thing that people asked about, which we were kind of not clear on, is whether or not this would be limited to 2 units in one structure, i.e. like a duplex, or if you could actually be allowed to have 2 separate houses on the same lot, allowing up to 2 units. So I just wanted to put this question out to you. I'm not sure that we have a strong opinion about it, but I just wanted to hear feedback from you. If you live in an RG district and you've got a lot that's big enough to handle it, should you be able to build 2 separate houses in addition to, or if we're allowing 2 units, should they be in one structure?
Are you asking us now?
I'm asking you right now.
Thank you, sir.
I mean, I would say yes, just simply. It's a matter of 2 separate uses, right? Duplexes, you would assume that would be 2 single families, but in theory, the ADU could serve.
Can you speak up, please?
Sure, yeah, the duplex would be 2 single family, right? And so you're saying you have a single lot and you're building 2 homes on there, but those 2 homes would still be under one lot, or would that lot be split?
If it's split, if it's split, it would just be a normal situation. But it's like, if we're allowing this permission for up to 2 units, I think in various materials in open houses, sometimes we said duplex and sometimes we said 2 units. We thought about, it could be different things.
Yeah.
So somebody brought that back. I just wanted to matter to you. That's about it.
I guess, I don't know if I feel it matters one way or another to me, but I would certainly assume that what was meant was either a duplex or a house plus an ADU. Like the idea of 2 separate homes on one lot is not something that I'm familiar with in this sort of suite of planning zoning innovations that we're looking at across the country. But perhaps I'm wrong on that.
I wouldn't think it would be super common, but if you've got a lot that's large enough and you want to, sort of the same principle of doing ADU. Family staying, I suppose we're saying 2 units plus an ADU, you could build 3 structures. But
Yeah, I have, I'm not sure it's a concern, but I'm thinking more of the, blocking the massing and how that works. So there's one option where you have 2 houses and they're side by side and they're attached, and that creates what looks like 2 houses.
Yeah.
It's interesting, if you went through the van, you'd see lots of those. They're mirrored houses and they're all over the place. And they have a tendency to be as wide as maybe a detached home, but it's a real common form unto itself. There are other neighborhoods where that form doesn't exist at all, and I think I've heard a couple of people that are concerned that the neighborhood would change in character if they had two homes side by side, I'm guessing. But then there's also the alternative where if you have two homes on a lot, they don't have to be two houses attached. So if it's open, you have that opportunity. If there's a concern about design control in terms of how that relates to a neighborhood, that's another topic. So I'm just bringing that up as a part of a discussion in terms of the form, how that form fits in the neighborhood and how it could work. In terms of land use, I think if I went into any department here, anywhere, and approached the city and said, I want to put a duplex up, they wouldn't care if it was side by side or front and back. Except if we're in a historic district or up and down, yeah. So it could be all sorts of convoluted forms to create that. Certainly have done L-shaped ones where the bottom floor, top floor, and on top of the top floor, there's a section that goes up to another third floor. So there are all those options that would be available under a duplex land use wise. I don't know how you begin to tell people what to build style wise.
But isn't it a matter of,
Hold on. Just a second.
All in one building, though, right? You're saying all in one building. That's the big question. Is it all in?
Well, two attached buildings are one building too, aren't they?
but they're typically
still one.
under separate ownership.
But from a,
Oh,
if
two
we're,
separate lot buildings.
yeah, if we're talking about like.
That's the
building code,
question.
That's not a.
Well, if we're talking about building code, like if you had two townhouses, those would be two townhouse dwelling units per Virginia residential code, right? From like, that's what you would reference, those would be townhouses. You over under, that is a two-family dwelling per residential building code. Case in point, I'm not sure if it's zoning's job to control that, or if
Right.
people will just meet building code when they meet. And if, I guess our question would be like, do we care about the form of how it happens or not? If the use is happening. Do we care
Yes.
about the form?
Well, isn't it a matter
definition.
of use? So like,
Well,
they do categorize single family use, two family use, right?
we've
Already.
done, so we've got some jobs right now that the building commissioner says are townhouses, but zoning says are for multifamily units. But if you're stuck in the middle, it works out because you can tell the building commissioner, great, I'm doing residential building code, I don't have to sprinkler it. Because it's constructed that way. It just happens to be 4 units on the parcel. And zoning calls that multifamily. So it's like, I guess if we're simplifying it, our question is, do we care about how a duplex, should it exist, is configured?
If the question is, should you allow one structure or two separate structures? I think it should be one structure. I have thoughts about duplexes, but if duplexes are going to be allowed or where they are allowed, I think Richmond 300 contemplates their being allowed in certain residential areas. I think it's less disruptive to the historic pattern and to the neighborhoods to have one structure versus two.
What happens if that second structure is in the rear? You have your one house at the front of the street and then you put another structure in the rear,
Detached.
detached, or say detached at the alley.
Well, but clearly from the front, it would appear like one, but from the side and from the back and the angle, it would still appear it would be two, physically two.
The economics support, and you can build attached. The economics support the idea of separating.
I don't know. I'd imagine it's not easy if you've got one house, add another house attached.
You've got
I'd
all
imagine
the
it's way easier to add.
infrastructure, access,
Yeah, this-
lines.
Yeah.
Why would anybody build two detached structures on a single lot?
Well, it's just like an accessory dwelling unit, but bigger.
ADU right now, just as right now, your definition of ADU is limited scale.
Yeah.
You could, per se, you can build 2 units plus an ADU. You could build 2 units the same size plus a small
What about 2 units with the ADU in one of the units?
one. That could be as well.
I guess, I mean, the question we're asking is, if we're saying like basically you can build 3 units on a lot, do we care how they're configured? Or do we just suggest like, basically you can do three units on a lot, one happens to be smaller, it's an ADU?
Yeah, I would be trying to imagine you're the zoning administrator in 5 years who's tasked with making a decision, right? When you get the building permit application, if the question's gonna be, oh, which one is the accessory one?
Yeah.
If maybe they're all 3 the same size,
Yeah.
and, his head explodes. I don't know which one's accessory.
That would blow their mind.
Right, so maybe that should
Good to know.
suggest the two main dwelling units need to be the same visible structure. They need to look like the structure. So whatever other unit is clearly accessory to that. I don't know, that'd be probably worth a conversation with the zoning division to see what they think the building could be.
You need to,
Doesn't matter, it's a philosophical question.
Let's make sure we're not all talking over each other. Hold on just a second. Roger, Dave, did you have a question? And then Casey, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand.
Well,
earlier.
just, what matters not so much is, can you do it? What matters to me more is what fits in the district. And I don't know how we control that. So if you have a bunch of ranch houses in the district and you put, 2 3-story townhouses next door to each other, that would be a lot different than if you put one bigger front and more buildings in back. I don't know what is better or not better, or what converts or doesn't convert as time goes on. I'm just listening to the people who have said, I'm worried about having duplexes. And I'm thinking what they're really worried about is the visual impact. And I don't know. If
That
that's even
certainly is
something
an
that we
impact,
can
and I
manage.
agree with you that one structure with an ADU structure, if it meets the requirements, I think would be less disruptive.
Casey, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I like thinking about a home, if a homeowner is wanting to develop their property, and especially when we're considering putting things in the rear, which I think that will most often allow the most space for an additional structure. Again, that doesn't have the disruption issue with like visually from the front. And then from the side and rear, I think it's just density. And so if people have a problem with density, then that's a different question, like that's a different conversation. But if we're just talking about like, because if we separate structures, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure why homeowners should not be empowered to create density on their property that they already own.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm not asking, we basically sort of said for now, we're gonna have like 2 units.
Right,
Plus an ADU.
right,
The question is really about form.
right.
So you care whether they're in one building or separate.
No, well, I don't, because the restrictions will already be there as far as the width and the height. It's not like they're gonna have something in the back that's towering over the rest of the neighborhood. It's not gonna be that disruptive at the end of the day. So I don't think they need that.
Roger, did you have something to add?
I mean, it's really, I mean, we haven't really talked about this, but I'm assuming eventually there's going to be a huge fat section in this ordinance about design restrictions, control and process. That's where all this can be sorted out.
So I'm hearing, much like we do about the duplexes and residential areas in general, that there's consensus on both sides. You either love it or you don't. And I suspect that's what we'll probably hear from the public. But we've talked a lot about solving the housing crisis, solving housing affordability, addressing that through density. I would suggest maybe you draft up some language of what it could look like if it were 2 primary units attached or detached, plus an accessory, and give us something to chew over. And ultimately, like I said in the last meeting, and I do agree with Roger that a lot of it's going to look like will be addressed probably through design. But we could go back and forth over this one topic the entire meeting. So like I said last meeting, much like on the duplexes, I think ultimately I can see this group not agreeing, but we've got to get it out to the public and see what they think. As it's an option because the public is saying we need to address housing affordability. The master plan says we need to do it through, we need to increase density. So is there any heartburn with at least having the consultants draft up some language for us to look at? Okay, because I mean, we could really talk this one for the rest of the meeting.
Yeah, so we'll for the moment, we'll consider allowing the separate structures and we'll.
Separate structures independent with space in between them.
Yeah, it could be. Two. The second question here, and I want to get out with the rest of it, I just want to put this in front of you as well. It seems like an important one. One thing that happened, and this is not only from the open house, but a discussion with staff since then. The simplified matters, we thought about removing minimum lot size from the target districts and defining only by minimum lot width. And so the reason for this is putting more emphasis on the generally people talking about lot size width, they're talking about the appearance of the street for the building, so not something that's built like it's super, out of the in terms of how much space it takes up. And so we kind of wanted to just put this in front of you and solve, so you think, obviously, we don't regulate lot depth. The lot size obviously is a product of depth. So if we remove lot size, or remove lot area, I should say, we restrict lot size, lot width only. What's the impact? So when we kind of thought this was that one potential sort of maybe unusual or kind of unintended outcome, this would be if you have a lot on a corner, you can see in the background. We're allowing, let's say this is RDC, which would allow minimum 2,000 square feet and minimum width of 25 feet. If we say we're regulating width only size, we turn around this lot and say, okay, we can actually put 4 lots here that all front onto the cross street. They're meeting the 25-foot minimum, same as the other lots up and down the streets, but they're small. They're very small, smaller than 2,000 square feet. How does that sit? Do you feel like that's wrecking the character of this area, or do you think it's okay?
One clarification though, I think the subdivision ordinance has a minimum lot depth requirement of 100 feet. Right?
It's is it 95, 95 or 100? You have to get it waived.
So you'd have to deal with that.
We're working on that. Some changes to subdivision as well.
Does that conflict with Virginia code?
Would assume not.
You said building code?
What's currently on the books for the 100-foot lot depth minimum subdivision ordinance? I'm assuming they're allowed to, that's been on the books for a while. State.
Is your question doing away with it? Would that be prevented by the Virginia code? Is that your question?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, sorry.
Genuinely don't know, but I would. We do lots. I mean, you can get it waived at the planning commission.
Okay.
If you're done before. So I would assume if you're able to waive it that way, you
I mean,
fine for your board. So we may do some more research into this. Honestly, this just came up this morning in discussions with staff. So just wanted to put this in front of you and just see what your reactions. Is it like blow your mind, or is it okay?
Taking these, putting to, have a smaller, just smaller
That's-
lot,
Fronting onto a different.
small scale lot.
I mean, that's what the district's intended to do. Whereas you wouldn't have 25-foot lot width. So the district is intended to develop this kind of character, especially on corner lots. So
If we're regulating width only and not size, then yes, you would be able to do some. Presuming it's okay under the.
yeah.
What you're saying is that in this image, the far left unit is the one that would be facing the perpendicular street.
The street.
So let's say this is
It's the one
this is
that
all
would
one
be
lot.
allowed if we're only doing width, but would not be allowed if we're doing area.
Yeah, so let's say this is all one lot right now. Right now it's 25 feet wide. Let's say you turn it around, you're still being the 25-foot requirement, and now you're turning 4 lots.
And so you have to have enough block depth here. I mean, assuming you want to park that and have parking in the front.
This question's of realism.
So it's not necessarily going to happen in that scenario that you've not shown there.
From a form perspective, I'm thinking of parts like Harrison Street running through the fan. A lot of the fan doesn't have streets that have houses fronting onto them if they're the side street, but there are other corridors that are north-south of the fan that allow the units to turn the corner. I personally don't have fault with that, particularly in an urban setting. Maybe in the lower density residential settings, people would get a little squeamish at the thought of that. See it both ways.
yeah, there's a development like this in Churchill right now, where there's a lot fronting 25th, but then they turn it around and on the side street, they have the front doors, but they're all attached. And so in this instance, all the units would be detached.
Yeah, let's just say that this is RDC, so these would all be detached.
Right.
So you could build, again, duplexes or whatever we're saying.
Sure.
But yeah, so it'd be separate, separate in each one. You don't have parking requirements, so you could do all.
I mean,
I'm not sure if it would get built, but just.
You could theoretically do a duplex and an ADU.
You could do
Yeah.
just that.
I mean, this
And
is
obviously, it would still be subject to setbacks and everything, including front setbacks. It would really take up a lot of the lot that's shallow, front and rear setbacks.
I mean, from a builder's perspective, this is an ideal starter home size. And so, developing that kind of home in these districts would be great for the city. So I back this.
A little concerned about the corners. I'm not concerned about the internal areas of the block. The only reason I'm concerned about the corners is I'm just thinking about, you got a whole row of houses, and then all of a sudden, the first house in the corner would have something that protrudes out. I'm just visually, I'm a little worried about that.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
you have a side street setback that would,
Fine.
so
So
in theory, kind of align to the other houses behind here. Setting it. So you might be basically setting yourself back out of existence.
Or if there's
If it's a side to side or side.
if we were to, with a forum-based conversation, have a sub, currently there's a no regulation. Front yards where adjacent main buildings exist, where you have to match or add.
within a certain number of feet.
It's in the garage.
Yeah, so it maybe something like that exists that would answer the curiosity about that actual corner being kind of a little too proud, maybe.
You probably couldn't build on this lot, actually, because of
Right.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that might rid of that.
You probably have a site triangle too.
Kevin has a comment.
I think tiny lots are great to build.
Sure, so I just wanted to maybe frame a little bit of this conversation, and you can yell at me because I've been pushing this. The thought is, in terms of just our limited infrastructure, the frontage is what makes development happen, right? So you break the street, you break the pipes, you break the wires, per frontage. And I think in this case, if that were a vacant lot, for the exact corner parcel, yeah, you may have to pick an orientation. But I think one of the things we talked about is in terms of being able to service how many parcels, and really for two reasons, when you think about lot division or subdivision, I think much more controlling is that frontage. And so when we are talking about how wide we're going to set it, setting it in a way that in some cases, we may have lots that can be subdivided, and in some cases we'll have no subdivision possible, because there's not enough frontage, to bring the supplies to that. While you could do 4 lots here, I think maybe from a more practical perspective, and I think, thinking about starter homes, maybe it's just one new lot gets created that you could then develop, that one against the alley, or one in between, or maybe 2 lots, and then just thinking about ways to, again, in terms of the infrastructure is already there. So all we're looking at is laterals that start connecting and developing. So just thinking about ways to not have to build new infrastructure to get more housing. Right.
Yes, you could hive off this back from, let's say here.
Yeah.
So I think we can take this away, do some more work on it. Good broad question. For conclusion right now, but just wanted to. So just to kind of take you through what you see in front of you, district standards. I'm not going to go through all of these. A lot of these are actually quite similar to what you saw before in the overviews that we've been sharing with you for the last few months. So just to kind of show you what you're seeing in front of you, there's 2 pages for each district. First one is lot standards. The next one is building standards. These standards you see here, which are diagrammed out, and again, some of these diagrams finish like these ones, and they've got labels and so forth. There's also some of the documents that are not finished here. So those will get updated in the next little bit. So lot width. So right now, for the moment, we took out lot area. Now that back down again. That's more. Maximum units per lot. This is the case of RDA. As an example here, building coverage and amenity space doesn't matter in this case here. It's just the important happens in the other districts. Building setbacks, space between buildings and the property lines, percentage of the lot frontage that a building has to occupy. Again, this is going to come more into play when we get to the other districts later on, and where you're allowed to put parking within the building. This is lot standards. This is building standards here. So height and width of the buildings regulated. Active depth and building frontages. Again, I'll show you an example from mixed use afterwards, where this comes into more place, and these are again, not relevant to residential zones. Ground floor height and elevation, transparency requirements, limits of blank walls, and distance between entrances. So this is RDA. So this is your kind of least dense residential detached zone. So just want to say, sorry, the diagram here, we're showing, here's a detached house, and this little illustration here. That's an ADU, for example. Here's a duplex building. It makes 4 lot standards. This is sort of your kind of shortest mixed use zone. So lot size and width here, dwelling unit for building, we don't regulate in this case here. Coverage, amenity space we do. The light green space you see in here is just for the middle lot. That's how much amenity space you're going to be required to produce for a lot of this size. It's this percentage of the total lot area. Building setbacks, small size. The build to percentage, so that's the percentage of the front of the width of the lot the building has to occupy. The minimum of 80% in this case here on the primary street, and then on 40% of the side street. And the parking location not allowed. And the building standards, example demonstration building that they use for building commercial residential in this case. So maximum height, like 4 stories, of course, 4. Maximum building width, 175 feet. Maximum active depth or minimum active depth area. That's the red area in the diagram here. That's essentially kind of a requirement saying you have to have some sort of active function happening around these frontages. You can't have parking within the buildings in that area. You can't have storage or something. You've got to actually animate those frontages. So it's a minimum depth of 20 feet around the outside. On the primary street, 9 feet on the side street. Ground story heights, different from residential and commercial, but there's a minimum height standard. There's an elevation minimum, maximum. And there's a standard for transparency, different from residential and non-residential, of course. Non-residential expected more transparency at the ground level, forefront, so offices at least that have big windows. And then lastly, upper stories. And then there's a maximum length of line. We're allowed to have both the primary street and side street. Maximum distance between entrances. That's the idea to sort of prevent, particularly if you've got a very long building, you don't want to just have big expanses of spaces for mixed use building with no access. So this kind of just a small feature that helps animate and activate those frontages. And so some of these standards you've seen before. We talked through this districts. There's a few additional ones. So just kind of wanted to introduce you to those. Essentially the same set of standards for the rest of the districts as it goes through.
Now, are we going to be given an opportunity to comment on some of the specifics here?
Yeah, so I think so. We're going to ask you a few questions about specific things tonight, but I also would invite you guys to take away this whole document, mark it up, and bring it up the next meeting. Also, the working groups will get a chance to kind of really go through some of the things. The main purpose of the working groups, especially. But we'll bring back bigger issues if people have the questions about the next meeting.
I could pause for a second, Marianne. I think that's a good, I know we're going to talk about some of these today and we're going to have questions posed, but some of we're seeing a lot of this for the first time. So we can make sure there's enough time on the next agenda, even though the working groups are going to take a deeper dive, but for us to add some time to mark it up and come back and talk in a little bit more detail. Thanks.
And the back of the document, the larger part of it is so for each one of these standards, you'll have lots of questions about how do you calculate that? What does that mean? Look at the back of the document, there is a approach for calculating all this stuff and defining it. Some of the stuff is sort of standard from other work that's done before. We need to kind of create some of these interpretation over time to make sure they work for everybody here. So please take a look through these as well. We'll go through the example. Just gives us a few example pages here. This is how you calculate or how you get a parking location, what active depth is and how it gets measured exactly, and ground story height. But for each one of the things that I took you through, each one of that. Second thing here, your mapping package or your workshop package. That's that tabloid size document. We're going to look at this more. We work up later in just a second. But just to say, for each one of these tests, we put forward a kind of question to you, which I'm going to take you through in a second. And we give them 4 different images for a series of different tests. So the first one is just an aerial, just to kind of give you a context. Right now, probably not a good idea what's there. Second one is the existing zoning as a reference point. Third one is a map of Richmond 300's land uses. And the fourth one is a mapping map, which I say again is the draft for discussion purposes only. But do not panic if you don't like what you see there. It's exactly what we want to hear back from you. Is that the marketing document up and hear back from you. So we just wanted to put something out front. I think what we're really asking right now is we followed certain rules when we prepared this map. We wanted to understand whether we were taking the right approach. We wanted to follow consistent rules across the city, and they were approaching different neighborhoods and so forth in the same way. But we want to ask you about some of those approaches specifically. In addition to those questions, if you have any comments about anything else that's in the map, if you would like to see your home there, or anything else, I'd be happy to hear your comments on that. So this is essentially what's in the chat. The questions right now, I've got 3 different worked up questions for everybody, and my hope here is that we can get through each one of them over the next hour and a little bit. So if we spend maybe 15 to 20 minutes on each one, and then have like a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes to answer stuff, and then report back. Great. So briefly, I'm just going to tell you what the questions are. For the first discussion topic here, question, we've addressed this one before, but I just wanted to bring it back to you in map form, because I think it's starting to feel a little bit more real now. I'm sorry, main streets and residential areas. So we know that Richmond City is that you could have potentially up to small multifamily buildings in residential areas, according to the plan, with their definition of residential along major streets, they define it. So the question is, how far could those areas be upzoned? What or is there some form of single family? And what factors should be taken into account? So what's the rule, let's say, for upzoning area? Look at the district page, it's mapping tests is provided. So take a look at the mapping tests. You want to sort of see what those, again, be reminded what RDA or AA means. You can flip through your district page document. So looking at those, does the approach that's shown in the mapping make sense? Does it go too far or not far enough? We want to try and pick something to field from. And so the tests we're showing for this are the West End area, Oak Grove, and the East End. And specifically, you may see others in the map you want to comment on. But I think specifically, we're going to get you to take a look at the major streets, which are called out with a dotted line on the in the mapping, and to let us know if you think what we've done is correct. So as a first pass here, the rule we followed for upzoning the streets, we take the parcel with front onto the street. We said, okay, the old existing zoning, we're mostly talking about R1, R2, R3, R4. R1 in the new zoning largely becomes RDA. Yes, we may change the map in certain areas later on, but as the first pass, most of it becomes RDA. R2 also mostly becomes RDA. R3 becomes RDB. R4 becomes RDB, and R5 becomes either RDB or RDC, depending on plot patterns, how wide the lots are in system right now. When one of those lots happens to fall onto a major street, according to the plan, we basically upzoned it 2 runs in there. So 2 spots. So RDA becomes RDC. So allows still attached, but allows for smaller units, or smaller lot sizes. RDB becomes RAA, so it's allowing for attached up to 2 units, so townhouses and so forth. And then RDC becomes RAB, so it's allowing for small multifamily up to 6. One other thing just to say is that when we mapped it out, and you'll see that some of the examples today, we're really focusing on lots of fronted on there. So if it's a lot flanked, if it has a little bit sky, we would not have done. So that's the first question. So take a look at those examples. Let's go back and get to say about them. Second discussion topic here, rear transitions. We haven't really talked about this yet. I imagine it's concern to people. In some cases, Richmond 300 places more intensive uses. So, for example, community corridor destination of downtown use. The plan back has a less intensive ones. Residential or neighborhoods, for example. With appropriate transition standards, which you do already have in your code today, and we'll have some equivalent of that in the new code. What differences in height are appropriate beside each other? We'll just show you a transition standard in a second example. So the buildings will not, you won't be able to have a 13-story building beside a residential area directly abutting each other. There'll be some sort of a stepping down required, but we still want to know what your opinion is about, the height, the maximum heights of the beside. Is it too extreme in differences or is it okay? Or should it be great? There's a couple different models for either approach transitions. You could set buildings back or you could set them back at the rear. You can also zone a kind of a band or kind of transition to have a higher zone along Main Street, something between that and something further down as you go into the interior of the neighborhood. So looking at the mapping test, the maximum height assigned makes sense to you, and you can see what they are just by looking at the end of the district, of course. They're being like 13 and like 8 and 6, etc. But the higher of the so the example just showing you the package of downtown the Chaco, so the east side downtown, and parts of the Broad Street corridor that is already here. And then just to sort of show you just briefly what the transition standard is, there might be, you have some bulk planes in your code today, which is kind of an imaginary angular plane that gets cast from the property line. Usually the approach that the our firm takes is more about stepping. So rather than having the bulk plane, which is a bit hard to imagine, we just say you have to have a certain minimum setback, and then maybe it's above a certain height, you have to have a greater setback for upper stories of the building. So this is just an example to make it from the Charlottesville code that we worked on. In this case here, so the first 3 stories have got to be set back 44 feet. Or so the first 3 stories, I should say, have got to be set back 20 feet. And the upper stories beyond that would be set back 40. If the building gets taller, there might be.
Is that depth, is that height B to match the neighboring residential structure?
Yeah, so it could be different here.
This is different. The maximum height that's allowed in the district, but not the structure. The structure.
Yeah, so if you're allowed to build 3-story buildings in this, let's say, neighborhood area on the left-hand side, that we'd sort of be trying to match that as the base point. So that's how I thought this going. What this means, and one of the kind of the consequences of this is that if you have a typical kind of a double-loaded residential building, where you have apartments facing units facing both sides, multi-unit building would be about 60 feet or so in depth. And so if you imagine this is facing a major street here and you have a neighborhood in the back, if this portion here is 60 feet, and this setback here is 40 feet, that means you basically need at least 100 feet of block depth to build that kind of building. Now, there's other types of buildings with single loaded and so forth. But there is a relationship here between lot depth and maximum height. So for some lots from depth that are very shallow, you just can't build a very tall building. So just want to get a gut check from the mapping. This time there will be some sort of transition. So those heights that you see make sense to you. Considering also the lot depths. Yeah, you could get really tall. Final discussion topic here, and this is probably a bit of a shorter one. CG4, the commercial general district that we talked about, we're still trying to figure out where to use it. We talked about creating this slightly more auto-oriented commercial district, mostly for arterials in the other parts of the city where there's maybe not a realism, like they're forcing everybody off the street. We're going to allow maybe some a little bit more auto-oriented with more. We still would want to have. We wouldn't want to have parking between the building and the street, but more parking to the side, let's say, more options for doing something like more auto-oriented commercial buildings in the short to medium term. And so in terms of where we put it in the mapping tests, we took a look at the BRT, the planned BRT route in the south side of the city. Basically said, if you're within a quarter mile of the BRT stop, we're going to enforce MX zoning more. If you're more than a quarter mile, we would allow CG. That's the logic of what we're showing this test right now. I'm not sure if you agree with that or not. The question to you. We're showing 2 different examples. One is from Midlothian, from the Turnpike, where you get some of that space, you get really, really deep suburban commercial lots. So we applied some out there. We're also showing a bit of a different example, which is the southern part of the Hull corridor. In that area, it's much more urban lots. And so in that area, even though there are some spaces that are more than a quarter mile from a proposed BRT stop, we're still showing all incentives. So those are sort of 2 different approaches. But again, I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on that. Any questions before we get started?
Everyone clear on the assignments? Okay, so are we gonna be reporting out? Should we save time for that?
That's my
Or,
point, save at least 5 minutes for the report.
okay,
And then you could be on your own time.
okay.
Is there a cheap taker? Yeah, it would be great if somebody, there's space for everybody to take notes if you want, reports and give it back to us. But if somebody wants to give it to report back.
Right.
What's that?
Can you get on the line to?
Yeah, well, you didn't have enough to do.
To do Wayne.
Oh,
Yes. Okay.
I assume the four of us are working together?
Okay. We're not gonna go over.
Hoping that.
Well, maybe you guys could get together.
Well, we can.
We're talking about
Chicken
this.
giver is
I feel
not
like.
paying attention for the last 15 minutes of this meeting.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like,
Get
it
together?
was, actually, I could stay for 2 hours and I got here.
I would say if we could have from each
you could
table.
like stand on
One-
Hey, can I
opposite
come
sides.
outside now for a
Yep.
second? Hey, guys.
I would say if we could get from each table,
Hey, guys.
major takeaway to get back to the
Roger.
consultant.
Game.
So in terms of, I think, right, and it's, if they work on just like, here's a norm, or here's the default that we're going to use, and like applying things or doing things, if there's one of those from each table, I think we could report out that. I think I have a few from ours we could offer up.
Why don't you kick it off then?
So I think one of ours that we talked about is, when we have, right, we talked about upzoning on major streets. And I think, is there also like another degree of upzoning when two major streets hit each other? Consider that. So like, right, you have along the corridors, but then also at the intersections. Again, if you're trying to like allow for density, like the intersections of major streets are like where you'd want to see things. Does that kind of reflect what we talked about? All right, that's our direction.
I'll throw out one. The two-step up approach seems to be, in some cases, pretty extreme. For example, going from R1, which is 20,000 square feet and 100 feet wide, to RDC, proposed, is 2,000 square feet, 20,000 to 2,000, and 100 feet wide to 20 feet wide. It seems it's going to be very inconsistent with the overall area. And also, we talked about some of these streets, you offered up the west end, so that's what we're focused on. Some of these streets, it might be appropriate to have more development, such as certain areas along Grove where there is already multifamily in Patterson, but not on other streets where there's none, like Cary Street. So any other?
Yeah, I'll add one other more comment in terms of the inclined plane or the stepping up at the back, going down to a different district. Noticed a lot of areas where you've already done that by stepping up the zoning and then going across the alley and going up another level. That seems to work well, but for those small areas where we run into the conflict of something very tall versus very short, the inclined plane is a really good idea. And I think that would work well. And one other thing, I think there's some areas at Southside that could definitely use some major upzoning. We were looking at Southside Plaza, and then heading over, it's already upzoned pretty much at the Midlothian Belt location, I think it is. Also, just in terms of process, it's going to take a lot of personal time to educate myself for understanding the zoning item and the map, and just mentioning that that's a lot of work and a lot of time. So that has to be fit into our schedule, what we're doing as a group. And I don't know if there are ways to make that easier or not easier. This is pretty legible. Okay.
Yeah, just globally, combine 1 and 2 a little bit, I guess. First one sounded like we liked the idea of using the corridors, the major streets, particularly in the east end, maybe as a good way of concentrating as much density as possible to allow for the residential neighborhoods to statistically have a better chance of being more intact from a socioeconomic standpoint. Generally summarizing that. And then also the Shaka Bottom capping at 4 stories for a lot of it seemed a little undercut from what maybe should otherwise be there according to Richmond 200. Yeah, don't want to keep yammering. So.
Renee, any party comments? Yeah.
No, other than I just say like there's a lot of content here, so it'd be great if you guys could take some time and take a look at the maps and the districts in more detail. We'll take the next meeting to follow up on this, answer any questions you guys have, and follow up and have additional stuff on any of this stuff. I think the additional content that might come out next time is going to be more on uses But we can stay as long as we need to on the district stuff and the form stuff next time.
I think we're definitely gonna need more time on the district, so. Yeah. Just plant that seed now.
Just one quick comment. When we have it in advance, it's a lot easier to have the discussion. The
Yeah.
discussion stuff that we have read over.
Yeah, I apologize.
That's a lot.
Especially with the open houses last month, it was a bit of a last minute putting things together, some of our finishing things, so. Hopefully we get in contact more next time, but certainly everything we've got right now is time to review that more.
Thank you.
Right, yeah.
In terms of process, I have a question. Is there an option for us to set up like, maybe training or study zones where we can come in and talk to somebody about what we're looking at and get a better feel for different sections of the city and around for feeling, or if we have questions about the input, just so that we can, it may save us as individuals a lot of time if we could be taught a few things in the process. I know your discussion here was very helpful for just pointing things out as we were going through and finding our way through.
You're talking about something different than the working groups though?
Yeah.
You're talking about something different than working groups?
Possibly an open session or you're allowed to come in and meet.
Well, if we have 3 or more counts or advisory members, then we have to like post it. But what I've been offering is just like one-on-ones with any exact members. I'm working with one right now, just like very kind of, well, high level and also more particular. So if that's something you're looking for, I'd be happy to meet one-on-one. I don't know if you wanted multiple people, but I'd be happy to.
I think no more than 2 at a time.
No more than 2 at a time.
In separate rooms.
I'm just trying to help like better understand like some of the concepts and just understand, because I think also, what we're putting together, the form of this document, I guess, intended, right, is very different than the structure we have right now. I think, Brian's been very helpful trying to maybe, I think, illustrate, right, like what we regulate now and how it looks regulated and potentially the new.
We could just make sure that the group has Brian's email, so we know how to contact him if anyone wants to sit down. I'm just making sure everyone has Brian's email so that we can, if folks want to contact him and take a deeper dive as you're offering, you could get that out, Mary.
Yeah, I'll set up, I'm gonna send a follow-up email. None of this is online as of yet. Linking it to these documents. I'll make sure you have everyone's contact info.
So now we're a few minutes past 6 o'clock. I'll just remind everyone that the next council meeting is April 9th, 4 o'clock in this room. And the boards from the February open houses are available on the city's website. And the survey questions from the open house are also available, and there's links on the back of your agenda. The survey will close March 31st if you haven't taken the time to go through it yourself. With that, we're adjourned.
Thank you. Renee?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to leave those or?
So we'll be able to email you them. So I don't know if you want a hard copy for the next month, you'll just look at it. I don't know if you wanted to like more comments and bring it back or keep this down.
Yeah. I think that's perfect.
Okay.
Figure that out. All right.
Yeah, so let's. It was more, if you want to like. Review it more, you have more.
Gonna show your text.